Have you ever pondered the dark chapters of history that schools rarely teach? Let's take a journey to uncover the hidden past of residential schools in Canada. In the late 19th century, around the 1870s, a new chapter began in the annals of Canadian history. A chapter marked by the establishment of residential schools funded by no less than the federal government itself. This was not a mere educational endeavour, but a project with a far-reaching purpose: the assimilation of Aboriginal children into Euro-Canadian society. These schools were not just institutions for learning, but tools for a transformation, a metamorphosis that sought to erase the cultural identity of thousands of Aboriginal children. Imbued with a Euro-Canadian ethos, the schools aimed to mould these children into a form that was alien to their roots, to their heritage. The inception of residential schools was a turning point in Canadian history, but for reasons one might not expect. As we delve deeper into the history of these institutions, a grim reality emerges. The residential schools were not just educational institutions, but more akin to correctional facilities. The children were subjected to an environment of harsh and inhumane conditions. They were pulled from their families, their communities, forced to live in unfamiliar and unfriendly surroundings. The schools were often overcrowded, with insufficient resources to cater to the basic needs of the children. This led to rampant disease exacerbated by malnutrition. Many children fell ill, and the lack of adequate medical care resulted in a high mortality rate. The very walls of these institutions echoed with the cries of children longing for the warmth of their homes, their families. But the affliction wasn't just physical. It was psychological. It was emotional. The children were stripped of their cultural identity, their language, their customs, and forced to adapt to an alien way of life. They were punished for speaking their native tongue, for practicing their traditions. They were moulded, coerced into the image of what was deemed civilized, acceptable. The abuse didn't stop at cultural assimilation. Many children were subjected to physical and mental abuse. They were treated not as children, but as subjects, as objects of an experiment of forced assimilation. The scars of this abuse ran deep, etched not just on their bodies, but on their minds, their souls. These children were robbed of their childhood, their innocence, their culture. They were forced to grow up in an environment of fear, of pain, of loss. They were taught to be ashamed of who they were, of where they came from. They were taught to reject their roots, to erase their heritage. The toll of these schools was not just on the physical well-being of these children, but on their culture, their identity, and their spirit. The dark reality of residential schools is a testament to the resilience of these children who, despite enduring such trauma, fought to preserve their identity, their culture, their spirit. The echoes of these injustices still reverberate in the lives of the survivors and their communities. The closing of the last residential school in 1996 marked the end of a dark chapter in Canadian history. Yet it was far from being a final closure for the survivors. The aftermath of this era was, and still is, a challenging ordeal for many. The scars of abuse etched deep into their souls, survivors carry with them the haunting memories of their past. The trauma, both physical and psychological, has been an undue burden they've had to bear, long after the school's doors were shut. Moreover, the struggle to reconnect with their lost cultural identity is yet another battle they face. Stripped of their native languages, traditions and customs, many survivors find themselves in a perpetual search for a sense of belonging, for a connection to their roots. The end of residential schools did not mean an end to their impact. The road to healing is long and arduous, but acknowledging the past is the first step. This truth was embodied in 2008 when the Canadian government officially apologised for the atrocities committed in residential schools, an apology that marked a turning point, a moment of public recognition for the suffering endured by countless Aboriginal children. In the same breath, the Truth and Reconciliation Commission was established, a body dedicated to uncovering the full extent of this dark chapter in Canada's history. Its mandate: to ensure that the stories of survivors are heard, their experiences acknowledged, and lessons learned to prevent such horrors from repeating. Knowledge is a powerful tool indeed. By learning about this part of history, we arm ourselves against the repetition of such atrocities. The history of residential schools in Canada is a stark reminder of the power of acknowledgement and the resilience of the human spirit.